My name is Ianne, and this is my video out. My name is Ianne Fields Stewart. I use they, them, she, her pronouns, and I am a Black, queer, non-binary, trans-feminine storyteller working at the intersection of theater and activism. That's my little tagline. So non-binary trans woman is another way to refer to me that's not attached to what I do. I've kind of recently on the podcast I co-host, Topics Include, been talking about, our most recent episode was just about talking about using cultural identifiers as part of our identity. So I think that for me, non-binary is how I've kind of always felt about my body, that it never really possessed a gender that seemed to fit into either category that we have along this, made-up binary. But trans woman was a term that felt good to me, and I started embracing as I realized how the world was taking me in. And so I think that in some ways, while trans woman is very honest about my lived experiences, my own medical transitions and things like that, and I share many experiences with trans women who don't identify as non-binary. I think that for me, non-binary is sort of how I talk about myself when I'm with myself, and trans woman is how I talk about myself when I'm with others, as a way to translate my experience in something that's digestible, because I think that there is an importance to us having language and names for things that can provide us with community. I think that's why we have labels, and I think that's the truest reason why we found labels in the first place, is that we wanted to find community with other people who were like us. I also identify as a queer lesbian, and so for me, and lesbian is a very new term for me. I've always identified either as bisexual or queer, that's still how I feel today, that it's I am open to dating any human being as long as, they hot and I'm hot and we're hot for each other. But I think that for me, the term lesbian is something that I find myself in as far as who I want to share community with, who I feel the safest around. And I think that the lesbian community, as well as the lesbian culture, is something that I'm finding a lot of validation and affirmation in. And there's something about being in a relationship to other lesbian women or lesbian people that feels really good to me. I'm 205 till I die, Birmingham, Alabama. I was born in Georgetown, Kentucky, so I can't say that I was born in Birmingham, but I lived there since I was 3 years old, so that's definitely home for me. I'm definitely a true deep Southern girl, which not everyone can tell because they say oh, you don't have the accent or things like that, but when you get to know me, and for the people I think who know me from when I lived in Birmingham, there is an intimacy there and an awareness of where I've come from and who I really am. Not that I'm faking anything, but just that I think that, and it is all part of that narrative, right, of people from the Deep South who leave, and to be part of that community of folks who leave, and what it means to hold that, and then to come back, and to have that nomer and that name, and sort of that ideal of being seen as the one who made it out, but then also realizing once you make it out, that there was a lot that you left behind, and what that means. So I think that being from the Deep South is always something that's been very important to me to talk about and advocate for. Interesting. I think that my queerness was something that was named before I named it for myself. It really depends on how we talk about queerness, right? If we're going to talk about, when did I first know that wearing dresses was something that I loved to do, and that I loved women. I was as a very young, early in my developing years, I was identifying openly and proudly as a man-hating feminist, So there was already some queerness wrapped up in me from the beginning, whether it be from an early age where I told the woman at Party City that I wanted the princess dress, and she said, "Oh honey, no, that's for girls." And then I turned to my mama and said, "Mom, let's go to another store." There was a sense of what I wanted and how I was going to go about getting it. So I think that the first time that I gave name to something, because I think that there's what happens before we give name to who we are, And that's also part of the knowing and the coming into and the understanding. And then there's when we give name to it, both either to ourselves or to others. But I think the first time that I gave name to it was when I was in 10th grade, actually. And that was the first sort of like queer nomer that I attached to myself was bisexual. And that just came from a dream. And I just had a dream about a very beautiful black man who was in our class. And I had a dream that I was in our theater at ASFA and he was holding me, and it was the first time that I experienced intimacy. And by that point, I knew that, you know, through my own sexual exploration, I knew that I was attracted to both bodies, but I identified as a man-hating feminist. I knew that I could never love a man, and I always knew that it was about love. I think there's also something about myself that I've realized, which is that I always become an advocate for something and then become that thing. Which is not to say that I co-opt a culture, but I think that advocacy has in many ways been part of me naming my community and who I belong to and why I want to belong to them. And so I think that for me, you know, I was always supportive of the LGBTQ community until I realized, oh, I am actually a part of this community. And I felt a necessity to be an advocate because I had grown up being tortured for being something that I didn't think I was. And so when I found a name for it, it was on my own terms. It was a term that felt good to me. And so I think that moment is different than all of the moments that happened before that now I can look back on and say, oh, here was the first signs of queerness, right? But I think the first time that I gave a name to it was definitely in like 10th grade. And I've sort of labeled that as the time period. It might have been 9th grade, not sure. I'd have to go back and look at like what shows we were doing. Well, I think it's interesting. I last night was having a conversation with my mom, and she was telling me about, you know, oh, I've started, you know, I talk about you a lot because I'm her child. And, you know, I tell people about you, and I often tell stories of when you were young. And I found that I've started using she, her, and referring to you as my daughter from when you were young. And she was telling me that, you know, it feels really right. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, duh. But I think that for her, I think that the moment when we find a name for it, it's not really the moment that's for us. Like, I think that there is obviously the time that we find the name for ourselves, and that is important. But I think that beyond that moment, it's all for the people around us. It's the moment that they find the name for it. So I think that that's kind of what my mom is going through. She's going through her process of finding name for who she knows I've always been. And I think that when the people around us love us and truly take the time to think about who we are outside of what they may understand about how people are, I think that there is that experience, right? That there's that moment of, it isn't really about like, you know, that there was like a start time and an end time, or that there was like a previous you and a new you. That it's like, this is all part of the same journey and development. Just as it's interesting to think about that, you know, we have these like crafted journeys for cis heterosexual people, which is that, you know, you're born, if you're a boy, you play sports, if you're a girl, you do ballet or the arts, and you grow up and you meet and you have your first kiss and it's very cute, and then you meet somebody and you go to college and you have heartbreak, you have love, you find the right person, you get married, you have children. It's like we've carved these these roads out for all of these cis heterosexual people who are walking around and having this narrative reinforced for them, whether it be through media, whether it be through their own families, whether it be for the society that raises them and destroys them in many ways. But for queer people, the experience of our journey is always about how we find our way through it. And it's always, there are obviously similarities. There are like, you know, different cultural things that we can all laugh about and be like, oh girl, that was that time that I was ridiculous or I was fun. But I think that for queer people, our journey is about shifting narratives and moving outside of everything. It's about creating our own path, which is an exciting and liberating thing about being queer. And I think also a terrifying thing about being queer, because I mean, I talk about this often as sort of my own navigating the fantasy versus the reality. And there is a fantasy of a life that is easy, a life that is simple, a life that, you know, doesn't require all of these conversations. But in many ways, you know, especially if you're a black trans woman or a black non-binary trans woman, and you're queer, and you're a lesbian, it's like all these things come together and you slowly realize that reality is so much richer than the fantasy. And you can still mourn the fantasy, and that's okay, because that is part of the process. You know, we have to kind of let go of that idea of what was perfect for us? What was the ideal? What was the narrative? What was the fairy tale that we are still to this day trying to play out, either with our lovers or with ourselves? And how do we mourn that fantasy, let it go, and then find our truth? I've also talked about the idea of, like, I think that when we first come out, in whatever way that looks for you, I think we sometimes come out into the first box that's available to us. And that box is either gay, lesbian, bi. Maybe those are the only options you have, right? And then I think that some people move quickly out of that box into their own box, or out of boxes entirely. And I think there are some people who also live in that box for a long time, because there are boxes that are associated with our queer identities. And I think that we live in those boxes for a long time because it feels good to be a part of some kind of structure, because that's what we're taught. My best friend, Esther, that was not her name at the time, but she's since moved to Israel and has a new name, and it's beautiful and perfect. So I went to school. We were rehearsing for A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I just, during stretches, I was just like, hey, Esther, I'm bi. She's like, cool. And that was it. So it's I feel like I don't have too many times where there haven't really been too many coming out moments. It's so funny. I really just don't have too many narratives of oh, I came out in this way and it was, here were the reactions. A lot of it was just I think that there's always the pressure that comes around it, where people are making assumptions and I'm hearing their assumptions, and it's always that I'm like, you ain't gonna tell me who I am. I know who I am, and I don't need to fulfill any of your narratives. Bye. And then it's usually when they finally just accept who I am that I then sort of, which is not intentional, but I think it just seems to kind of play out this way, that I'm just I'm not going to make myself into anything that you think I am. I will only make myself into who I really am. And so then it's usually around that time when I just kind of have the chance to sit back and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool for me. I'll resonate with that, and it's very casual, and then it just starts, the word spreads as it does. Actually, Esther was also the first person that I wore high heels with. So she was also the first person that I started my journey of gender nonconformity with. Come to think of this, Esther's been there for a lot of the big stuff. And then I think that the first time that I named my transness, it was after a traumatic experience, and so that's why I don't really like to talk about it, because I don't want my trauma to be attached to my identity. But it is part of the narrative that I experienced something traumatic. Well, I was raped. Sorry, trigger warning. But I was raped, and it was the realization that I was being raped as a trans person. That I wasn't being raped as anything else. That was why that person had chosen me. That was why that person had isolated me in that way, because of their own narrative and their own fantasies. And it was realizing that made me it was realizing how they were treating my body that made me realize this thing that you are tapping into and that you have been tapping into for a long time, it's coming out of you, whether you are seeing it, whether you are recognizing it or not, it's coming out of you, and people are absorbing it. And so you have to claim your power. You have to claim that power back. And so I know that there are a lot of narratives that are around the idea that, our identities come out of trauma, and I don't want that to be something that I participate in. But I also have to be honest about my own journey. And so, and I definitely never said that on a recording before, but I think that part of me recovering from that rape was also reclaiming my body in many different ways. Not just about how I'm going to own my sexuality and own my body, but how I'm going to also recognize and explore my own body. And so I think that was the first time that I named my transness for myself. And then when I decided to medically transition, that was on, I just made a post on June 11th of 2015, or 2018, that's right, 2018, and so now I'm a year or some time in, and so that was literally just I knew that I was going to make the announcement. I knew that I didn't want it to be a thing. I had already had a conversation with my mother that I wanted to, I kind of told my mother, I was I'm going to start this journey, I want to change my name, I want you to rename me with me, because it was important that I have a name that we chose together, because she's my mother and I love her, and I love that she gave me a name, and there was some kind of importance to that for me, and there was a power I felt in like both of us choosing the name that I would go into the next part of my life with, and I wanted her to be part of that journey. So that was kind of that moment for me. We had done that, and I just kind of made the announcement. It was very much like, I don't like doing this, but here it is. Here are the facts. Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. And so onward and onward it has gone, and I think that all of the revelations that have come since then have come out of just a true determination and journey of seeking to reclaim my body in all the ways that it is stolen from me, whether it be because I'm a Black woman and people try to steal Black women's bodies, whether it be because I'm a trans Black woman and people try to steal Black trans women's bodies, whether it be because I'm a Black person and people try to steal Black people's bodies. From whatever aspect you want to look at this, I think that my journey of naming myself is all about reclaiming my body for myself. Because I think that there really is no other purpose for me. Like, otherwise, like, I don't owe anyone anything. I don't need to tell y'all any narratives. You can just be like, this is my name. Boom. I don't need any explanations. But there is a necessity for me to reclaim my body and reclaim my power through that. Ooh. I think the most pressing issue that we are facing as LGBTQ people is being LGBTQIA+. I think that is our biggest struggle. I think that we are, in many ways, forced together by a nomer, by letters. Our letters are forced together. Our communities are forced together. And I think that part of that force is dangerous. I think that we have to celebrate what makes us different and unify around the idea that what makes us different is necessary to talk about. There is no liberation for queer people if white gay cis men are consistently voting for gay marriage, and that's it. If you are a queer person, you are not horrified and talking actively about the deaths of Black trans women, there is no purpose to anything that we have done. None of it. Because we have been forced together, yes. We've also claimed it. And we've created pride all around it. And so if you're going to claim that pride, you have to be proud of all of us. And you have to be protective of all of us. And I think that that is the biggest thing that we are struggling with at this point, is that there are white cis gay men who are running the world as if they are straight white cis men. And that is a necessity to talk about. And those same cis white gay men have to be willing to hear that. They have to be willing to be held accountable. They have to be willing to do their own racial justice work and the undoing of their own work. And they can't rely on Black people to undo it for them. There are white queer people in general, and that includes white trans women, also need to be dedicated to undoing their own racist work. Because the thing about our community that is so interesting is that we are actually a community full, we talk about the rainbow in jest, but truly we are a community that is full of a whole range of communities. Because if you are connecting people just by who they love, then you have to also encompass all the things that come with that. Race, age, class, ability, neurotypicality. That's so not a word, but and that's part of ability. But all of those things, every ism that is available to us is present within our community, and we have to be willing to talk about it. We have to be willing to jump in head first to deal with all of those things, and in real and tangible ways, not just by throwing money at the problem, not just by having a panel, not just by having a conference even. The revolution does not happen by a conference. The revolution happens because we are in the streets doing the work. And being in the streets doing the work doesn't necessarily mean that you're at the protest, because that's not for everybody. But being in the street doing the work, for me, as I define it, includes those people who are going into themselves, into their own lives, into their own privileges, and accessing them. I am a light-skinned Black woman. I will never not talk about that, because with that comes privileges that I must be accountable for. And yes, I'm a Black, non-binary, trans woman, but all of those things don't take away from the fact that my light-skin privilege has been in every room that I've ever been in, and has been responsible for it in some capacity or other, in ways that I will never understand, and that is my privilege, to never understand it. What gives me the most hope is Black trans people. So I think that, and women, Black trans women specifically, but my community gives me the most hope. I feel so proud of who we are and how we survive. I feel discouraged by what continues to happen to us, but to see the joy on the faces of my sisters, brothers, and siblings is all that I ever really need. To know that there is something worth it. And I think in many ways that is what hope is. It's a thing that is worth it. Oh, oh God. I really love myself. I'm gonna be honest, I really do. I love my confidence. I love my new boobies. I love my ass. I love my legs. I love my mind. I love my nails. I love my skin. I love my hair. I love my lips. I love the way that I can feel so deeply. I love my tears. I love my past, and I love my present, and I love my future. I just love everything about me. I really do, which is a great thing that I've earned. And there are lots of times that my mind is not as kind to this body and this being that I love. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with, knowing that sometimes my mind fights me in ways that I wasn't ready for, or in ways that don't feel good to me. And there are people who are close to me who see when my mind fights with me. But I think that at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself, outside of what my mind sometimes tells me, I really do love everything about me. I love Ianne. I worked hard for her, and she's not going anywhere. So, as I said, I'm a storyteller working at the intersection of theater and activism. I'm also the founder of the Okra Project. We are an organization that hires Black trans chefs to cook home-cooked and healthy meals for Black trans people, and either cook it in their home or bring it to them wherever they are if they are experiencing homelessness. I started this about a year ago. In December, we'll be coming up on our one-year anniversary, so I'm really proud of this organization. I am also a performer and an actress, so hire your girl. I also am a writer, a director, a choreographer, and all of those things mean things to me as well. So once again, hire your girl. But I think that that's really it for me. I'm just here, and I'm trying to do the best I can and make the world a better place if I can do it. That's what I'm hoping for. Oh yes, you can find me on my website, www.iannefieldstewart.com, or you can reach out to me or you can just follow me on Instagram at TheFreeActorvist. That's TheFreeActorvist.